The photograph was supposed to be nothing more than a relic of joy. Two children, dressed in white, smiling beneath the dappled sunlight of a garden that no longer exists. The year was 1912, the afternoon still young, and the air filled with laughter. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch but don't subscribe. If you're here, feeling this story the way I do, don't just scroll past. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. Let's make this more than just a story. Let's make it a conversation. But time has a way of preserving not only faces, but echoes. And in this photograph, there were whispers. At first glance, you might think it's just an old black and white image. Two twin girls standing beside a birthday cake, ribbons in their hair, a family frozen in celebration. But if you look closer, really look, you'll notice something that shouldn't be there. It began with a single photograph collector who uploaded the image online, claiming it was found in a decaying trunk from a collapsed manor in Surrey. Within days, thousands had downloaded it, zooming in on the twins' faces, debating in forums, analyzing the background, the reflection in the window behind them. And somewhere between the shadows and the smile, people started to see what no one could explain, an expression that didn't belong to either girl, and the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. The photo wasn't just capturing a birthday. It was recording a moment that should have never been seen. Before we go deeper into this chilling story, make sure you stay till the end, because what was uncovered in that photograph isn't just a ghost story. It's a piece of history most people would rather forget, and a truth that changes everything we think we know about innocence, family, and the way memory distorts what we wish had never happened. It began with a sound. A faint crackle through an old speaker, the hum of static before a man's voice whispered, "Watch closely." Then the photograph appeared on screen. Faded, fragile, the corners browned by time. Two little girls stood beside a round table draped in lace, a cake at its center with 7 candles half burnt. The image trembled slightly, as though the air around it didn't want it to be seen. At first, nothing about it seemed unusual. It was one of those Edwardian portraits taken in natural light, with an almost tender sadness baked into its grayscale stillness. But the longer you looked, the more wrong it felt. The twins' eyes didn't match the joy of the scene. They looked past the camera, not at the lens but through it, as though something far behind the photographer held their attention. Their ribbons hung unevenly. One girl's hands rested on the other's shoulder, but her grip was too tight, the fabric beneath her fingers visibly bunched. That small tension made the whole image ache. Viewers described it as emotional gravity, though no one could say why. A collector named Daniel Price was the first to upload it. He specialized in early 20th century family portraits, often restoring them for galleries or museums. He had found the image in a locked tin box purchased from an estate auction in Brighton. Inside, along with the photograph, were 2 silver hairpins, a charred fragment of fabric, and a small tag that read Whitford Manor, July 3, 1912. Daniel thought little of it until he scanned it at high resolution. That's when the unease began. When viewed on screen, the shadows deepened unnaturally. There was a faint smudge in the background that didn't exist on the original paper. He zoomed in, expecting to see grain. Instead, he saw what appeared to be the outline of another child standing behind the twins. Faint, translucent, its features blurred as if moving. Daniel blinked, leaned closer, adjusted the lighting. The figure was gone. He laughed it off, blaming the scanner, yet a tremor stayed in his hands as he saved the file. He named it simply Twins 1912 JPG. The image spread across small history forums at first, shared among those fascinated by lost archives and antique photography. But the response was unlike anything Daniel had seen. Comments filled with discomfort. Why are they looking like that? Is anyone else seeing the figure? There's something in the window behind them. People began enhancing it, colorizing it, flipping the contrast to reveal hidden details. And that's when the noise began. Faint, low-frequency distortion that seemed to bleed into the file itself. Some claimed when they zoomed in too far, they heard whispers through their speakers, like a needle dragged across an old phonograph. Daniel tried to ignore the growing attention. He hadn't slept properly since uploading the image. He'd begun dreaming of corridors filled with smoke, of children laughing where no children should be. His inbox overflowed with messages, some from historians, others from people claiming the photograph was cursed. One even insisted he delete it, saying, "The faces change if you stare too long." He decided to look one last time to prove himself wrong. In the dim light of his studio, he opened the original print, set it beside the digital copy, and stared. The paper smelled faintly of damp ash. The twins stared back, eyes impossibly alive for something over a century old, and as Daniel's breath fogged the glass of the scanner, he swore he saw one of them blink. He dropped the frame, the glass shattering against the floor. The room fell silent except for his breathing. Sharp, uneven, human. But somewhere beneath that, faint and cold, came a whisper. Not from the room. From inside the photograph itself. "Do you remember our names?" Daniel never uploaded again. The image remained online, detached from its origin, endlessly shared. By the time internet users traced the tag Whitford Manor, Daniel's account had gone dark. His last message on record was a reply to a comment asking what he'd found. It read simply, "It's not what's in the photo that scares me. It's what's missing." Whitford Manor was never supposed to be forgotten. It stood on the outskirts of Surrey, surrounded by sprawling gardens, its white stone facade catching the morning light like the face of a sleeping god. The Whitfords were not royalty, but their wealth carried the quiet arrogance of those who believed history would remember them kindly. Yet by 1914, the house was gone, reduced to embers and silence, its name whispered only in the margins of local folklore. For decades, no one cared to ask what truly happened there, until the photograph reappeared. A journalist named Rebecca Kane was the first to connect the image to the ruins. She had a fascination for tragedies erased by time, and when she saw the tag Whitford Manor, July 3, 1912, she felt that quiet chill that always preceded discovery. She found the estate's remains 2 hours outside London, buried beneath overgrowth and nettles. Only the foundations remained, a hollow rectangle of stone and a stairway that led nowhere. The air smelled faintly of rust and rain-soaked earth. She took photographs, not out of curiosity but reverence, as though disturbing a grave. Through archives and parish records, Rebecca pieced together fragments of the Whitford family, Henry and Margaret Whitford, their twin daughters Alice and Clara, and a handful of servants who had lived on the property. There were whispers of tragedy, of illness, of the fire that took the house and one of the girls. No official cause was ever recorded. The surviving twin, though records never confirmed which, was sent to live with relatives in Bath and disappeared from public record by 1920. That was all the world knew. Until the letters appeared, Rebecca found them in the county archives. Brittle, smoke-stained pages tucked inside a box labeled Personal Correspondence, 1911-1914. Most were routine exchanges between Henry Whitford and an architect, discussing renovations to the nursery wing, but one letter, dated June 1912, stood out. It was written by Margaret, the mother, to an unnamed friend. Her handwriting was neat but trembling. "I fear something is not right with the girls. They speak in whispers when they think I cannot hear, and sometimes one answers when the other is not even in the room. Henry insists they are only playing, but the house feels wrong. The air in the nursery grows cold at night, and I keep finding the mirror covered as though they're hiding from their own reflection. I fear this birthday will be our undoing." Rebecca read the line again and again, her fingers leaving faint prints on the ink. There was something unbearably human in those words, a mother's confusion, fear, and shame tangled together. But what chilled her wasn't just the content. It was the fact that the letter had been written 2 weeks before the birthday photograph was taken. Later, Rebecca would visit a local historian who recalled hearing about the manor fire as a child. He spoke of lights that burned blue, of screams that carried through the trees, of two shapes seen in the window long after the flames began. No official cause. No bodies except one small skeleton, unidentifiable by then. The other child, he said, was never found. Some say she ran into the woods, he told Rebecca, lowering his voice. But the woods never gave her back. As the sun began to set over the ruin, Rebecca stood at what had once been the nursery. The floor beneath her was littered with shards of old glass, brittle enough to crumble beneath her shoes. In the soil, she found something small, a scorched piece of porcelain shaped like a doll's hand. Its tiny fingers were fused together, melted smooth. She slipped it into her pocket without thinking. That night, in her hotel room, she placed the doll's hand beside her laptop and opened the famous photograph once more. The image filled her screen, the twins frozen mid-smile, and for the briefest second, no more than a flicker, she thought she saw a third reflection in the window behind them. Taller, watching. Rebecca shut the laptop. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. She told herself it was nothing but fatigue, the brain's tendency to see patterns in the dark. But when she finally lay down to sleep, the smell of smoke drifted faintly through the room. Old, cold, and patient. In the morning, she found ashes on her windowsill. Just a trace. As if something had been standing there during the night, watching her dream. They were born minutes apart on a rain-drenched morning in March of 1905. The storm had raged all night, shaking the windows of Whitford Manor, as if the sky itself was warning what it had brought into the world. The first cry came soft, almost musical. The second, a scream that startled even the midwife. The mother, Margaret Whitford, would later write that when she looked upon her daughters for the first time, she felt two entirely different kinds of love, one light, one heavy, as though her heart had been split in two. Their names were Alice and Clara. Alice, the elder by 4 minutes, had a calm to her, the kind of child who seemed to study the world before entering it. Clara was restless, fierce in her laughter, quick to anger, quicker to forgive. To outsiders, they were inseparable. To their parents, they were a puzzle. Margaret doted on them both, yet Henry favored Clara. He said she reminded him of himself, a spark in a quiet house. But that spark would later burn everything down. From the beginning, the servants noticed strange things. Toys moved at night, chairs found dragged from one end of the nursery to the other. The governess, Miss Alden, once caught Alice speaking softly to the mirror, as if in conversation. When asked who she was talking to, Alice replied, "To Clara." But Clara had been outside, playing with the dog the entire time. Miss Alden dismissed it as childish imagination, yet began avoiding the nursery after dusk. The twins grew fast, mirroring each other's gestures, finishing each other's sentences, often claiming to share dreams. Margaret wrote in her journal that sometimes she couldn't tell which was which, that their voices began to blend in her memory. She once confided to the housemaid that she feared there were not two girls, but one reflection split in half. The housemaid laughed, not realizing how serious she was. By their 7th birthday, small differences began to appear. Alice grew quiet, withdrawn. Clara became bold, commanding. Their mother tried to capture them in a photograph, a tradition she had started since their birth. The twins wore matching white dresses, lace gloves, ribbons in their hair. The photographer, a local man named Edwin Harker, set up his camera by the garden window. The light was perfect, the air still. But when the plate was developed, the family found something unsettling. Clara's smile appeared strained, almost forced. Alice's eyes were slightly unfocused, directed not toward the lens, but something behind it. Margaret demanded another shot, but Alice refused. She said, "He's standing in the wrong place." Margaret asked, "Who?" "The boy in the glass," Alice answered. The photo session ended abruptly after that. The guests thought it was just childish nonsense. Only Henry seemed irritated, muttering that the girls needed stricter guidance. Later that evening, Margaret overheard Clara whispering, "Don't tell them. He doesn't like when you talk about him." The weeks following the photograph were marked by growing tension. Servants began quitting without notice. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. One night, Margaret awoke to find both girls standing beside her bed, holding hands. When she asked what they were doing, Alice whispered, "He says he wants to play inside." Margaret didn't understand, until Clara added almost proudly, "We said yes." The next morning, one of the mirrors in the nursery was found shattered, though the door had been locked from the inside. Henry blamed superstition and dismissed the staff who spoke of it. But from that night onward, the manner changed. The temperature dropped inexplicably in the children's room. The smell of soot lingered even when no fire had been lit, and sometimes Margaret would wake to find one of the twins sleeping soundly, and the other missing, only to return hours later barefoot, her nightdress damp with dew, claiming she had been talking to the mirror. When the day of the birthday party arrived, Margaret begged Henry to cancel. He refused, insisting appearances must be maintained. The photograph was taken that afternoon, capturing their final moment of innocence. By evening, the laughter had dimmed, the guests had gone, and the house fell into that strange silence that comes before disaster. Margaret wrote one last entry in her journal that night. "Something is wrong with the reflection. When I look at Alice, I see Clara's smile. When I look at Clara, I see no one at all. It was the last thing she ever wrote before the fire." For those who attended the Whitford twins' birthday party on July 3, 1912, the day was remembered less for its celebration and more for the way the air felt. Heavy, electric, as if the weather itself knew something the guests did not. The garden was radiant that morning, tables arranged beneath sprawling oaks, musicians tuning violins while servants carried trays of lemonade. Laughter rippled like the surface of a pond, delicate but easily disturbed. Every photograph taken that day would later feel like an attempt to trap normalcy before it dissolved. The guests arrived in their finest. Henry Whitford greeted them with his polished charm, though his eyes darted constantly toward the upper windows of the manor, where the twins watched from above. Margaret stood near the cake table, her posture graceful but tense. She wore a brooch shaped like an eye, a family heirloom, and kept touching it as if for protection. Those who noticed assumed it was nerves, the anxious affection of a mother hosting too grand a party. But there was something hollow behind her smile, the kind of look that belongs to someone bracing for a storm no one else can see. The twins descended the staircase precisely at noon. Matching white dresses, satin shoes, ribbons trembling with each step. Guests gasped at their beauty, at their symmetry. But one man, a photographer named Edwin Harker, would later say the girls seemed not entirely there, as though they were being guided down the stairs by invisible hands. Their eyes flicked to the mirrors lining the hall, pausing on each one. Harker said he saw Clara smirk faintly at her reflection, but when he blinked, she was staring straight ahead again. The afternoon unfolded in quiet disarray. A servant spilled wine on a guest's dress. Another swore she heard whispers in the corridor, though no one was near. When the time came for the cake, Margaret insisted on keeping the ceremony brief. The twins sat side by side, 7 candles flickering between them. Everyone clapped, sang, smiled. But during the final note of the song, Clara leaned toward her sister and whispered something that made Alice flinch. The flame nearest Alice's hand flickered, then died, though no wind had blown. Guests later recalled the silence that followed, the uneasy shift of laughter into confusion. Then the click of the camera. Edwin Harker captured that exact moment, Alice stiff, Clara still smiling, and behind them, through the reflection of the parlor window, a faint outline that no one noticed until years later. After the cake was cut, the mood soured further. A child claimed she saw another girl standing by the hedge, one who looked just like the twins but wore no shoes. Parents dismissed it as imagination. Margaret didn't. She froze, scanning the garden, and when her gaze found the hedge, she went pale. Henry quickly ushered her inside, muttering something about too much sun. The rest of the party carried on, but the joy had gone brittle. By dusk, the guests departed under skies darkening with rain. Servants hurried to clear tables as thunder rumbled distantly. The final photograph of the day showed the twins standing in the doorway, arms linked, watching the guests leave. The faintest smile lingered on Clara's lips, but Alice's expression was unreadable. Her eyes seemed to reflect not the garden, but firelight. Years later, the few surviving attendees would speak of strange afterimages. One woman swore that every time she looked at the birthday photograph, the background seemed to change, the hedge darker, the windows emptier. Another claimed she could see movement in the glass, as if the figure behind the twins were leaning closer each time she viewed it. But on that day, no one knew what they had witnessed. They left the manor with polite goodbyes and rain-damp hats, believing they had attended nothing more than a charming family affair. Only Margaret lingered in the empty hall, staring at the framed photograph Harker had delivered before departing. She traced the image with her fingertip and whispered, "He found his way in." Outside, thunder cracked across the hills. Inside, somewhere beyond the nursery door, came the soft, unmistakable sound of a child laughing, though both girls were fast asleep. By the time the photograph resurfaced online a century later, it had already begun to rewrite itself in quiet ways, small distortions that no one could quite explain. The file Daniel Price had uploaded in perfect grayscale began showing irregularities. Compression artifacts, some said. Corrupted pixels. But those who looked closer noticed that the distortions followed no digital pattern. They gathered in the same places, behind the twins, around the window, and sometimes across their eyes. It was a user named Eleanor Archive who made the first public discovery. She was a digital archivist with a background in photo restoration, and when she enhanced the image under spectral analysis, a faint outline emerged in the reflection of the window. At first it seemed like nothing more than light interference. But the longer she examined it, the more undeniable it became. A shape standing directly behind the girls. Human. Slender. Wrongly proportioned. Eleanor posted her findings late one night, accompanied by a simple caption, "There's someone else in the photo." The post went viral within hours. Tens of thousands of people downloaded the image, zooming in, arguing in threads, overlaying filters, adjusting levels. A community formed overnight, half historians, half thrill-seekers, each trying to decode the century-old mystery. Some swore they saw a man in the reflection, dressed in a suit, face obscured by motion blur. Others claimed it was a child, taller than the twins, eyes hollow, mouth open as if mid-scream. One user inverted the colors and claimed the figure's outline pulsed faintly, as though breathing. Another said they could hear something when the image was viewed on full brightness. A low hum, rhythmic and cold. Skeptics dismissed it all as mass hysteria, but the hysteria grew anyway. Eleanor received private messages from users claiming strange experiences, flickering lights, distorted voices in their speakers, mirrors fogging over without cause. One wrote, "When I zoomed in, the figure looked at me." Another sent an image attachment, a cropped version of the photo, where the reflection seemed closer, clearer, as if responding to the viewer. But when Eleanor opened the file, the image refused to load. Her screen filled with static before the program crashed. She should have walked away. But obsession has a way of whispering in the same tone as curiosity. She stayed up 3 nights straight, scanning the photo under every spectrum she could simulate. On the 3rd night, something shifted. When she reversed the color channels, she noticed a faint pair of words written near the bottom edge of the window pane, invisible to the naked eye. The letters were shaky but legible. They spelled, "I am still here." She blinked, zoomed out, then back in. The words were gone. The pixels reassembled into smooth glass. Her reflection on the screen looked pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. For a brief moment, she thought she saw movement behind herself in the monitor's reflection, a flicker of white, like fabric. The room was silent, but her computer fans began to whine as if straining. Then her webcam light turned on. Eleanor froze. She hadn't activated it. The green dot glowed steady. She minimized the image, disconnected her camera, and shut the laptop. But even with the lid closed, she swore she heard the faintest voice, muffled through the shell of the device, something that sounded like a child laughing softly, followed by 3 distinct knocks. By morning, she had deleted the original post and vanished from her social accounts entirely. The online forums erupted with speculation. Some claimed she'd been doxxed, others that she'd fabricated everything. But a few users who had already downloaded her enhanced version noticed something new in their copies. When they opened the file, the reflection was no longer faint. The figure behind the twins had grown clearer, its hand now pressed against the glass. When Rebecca Kane, the journalist, learned of these developments, she contacted Daniel Price, the original uploader. His email bounced back. His studio number disconnected. She found only one trace of him, a police record from a noise complaint filed by neighbors 2 nights after his last online activity. The report described loud shouting, something breaking, and then silence. When authorities arrived, the studio was empty, computer smashed, the photograph gone. The only thing left behind was a single sheet of glossy paper resting on his desk. A reprint of the twins' photo, except this time the window behind them was blacked out entirely, as if the reflection had stepped forward and taken its place. Rebecca stared at the image until her eyes ached. It was the same photo she had seen in the archives, yet somehow heavier. She caught herself whispering to no one, "What are you trying to show me?" From somewhere deep in the walls of her hotel room came an answer she couldn't mistake for imagination, a whisper faint and clear as breath. "Look again." The journal was found by accident. A bookseller in Bath, sorting through a trunk of war-era medical ledgers, noticed a smaller leather-bound book pressed flat against the bottom. It was fragile, its spine cracked, its pages watermarked with time. The first entry was dated April 2nd, 1912, and the name scrawled on the inside cover was written in a delicate hand, Margaret Whitford. When Rebecca received the journal weeks later, she held it as though it might break. The cover smelled faintly of smoke and lavender. The ink had bled in places, words swallowed by dampness, but the tone was unmistakable, the unraveling voice of a woman slipping quietly toward the edge of madness, or revelation. At first, Margaret's words were ordinary. She wrote about her daughter's laughter, the spring garden, her husband's constant absences. She described the twins' fondness for singing to each other through the walls, their whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered the room. She called them "my mirrored hearts," a phrase that recurred often, growing darker with each repetition. Then the entries began to shift. April 18th. Alice has stopped eating. She says it's because the boy in the mirror told her she doesn't need food anymore. Clara laughs when I scold her, says she's jealous that the boy chose Alice first. April 23rd. I have asked the servants not to polish the nursery mirror. It fogs over every night, though no one touches it. When I wiped it clean this morning, I found words drawn with a finger from the inside. Stay. May 5th. I woke at dawn to find both girls standing at the foot of my bed. They were holding hands. When I asked what they were doing, Clara said, "He wanted you to see we're ready." I asked, "Ready for what?" Neither answered. Rebecca turned the brittle pages, her fingers trembling. Some entries had been torn out entirely, their edges jagged. Others were stained with something dark that wasn't quite ink. She read on, June 11th. Henry insists the girls are fine. He says it's a phase. He doesn't hear the footsteps in the nursery. He doesn't smell the soot. When I close my eyes, I see the boy standing between them, smiling as though he knows me. June 27th. The birthday is coming. Alice says he wants to be in the photograph. I told her that's nonsense, that no one will see him. She smiled and said, "Oh, they will." Rebecca felt the air around her grow thick as she read. There was something suffocating in the way Margaret's tone shifted, from maternal worry to quiet resignation. The last full entry was dated the night before the fire, July 2nd. I dreamt of the mirror again. I was holding Alice's hand, but when I looked down, it was Clara's. When I looked up, the reflection was neither. Just one face, one smile, one pair of eyes staring back. I woke to the sound of laughter that didn't belong to either of them. Tomorrow is the birthday. He says once the photograph is taken, everything will be fixed. He says I'll finally see the truth. There was one more page after that. Nearly blank except for a single line written in shaking ink. He's not inside the mirror anymore. Rebecca stared at the words until they blurred. She didn't notice her own reflection forming faintly in the window beside her. Pale, distant and not quite aligned with her movements. That night, she left the journal open on her desk and drifted to sleep in her chair. At some point in the darkness, she woke to the sound of paper turning. The journal lay open to a page she hadn't seen before, one that hadn't existed hours earlier. Her heart hammered as she leaned closer. The page was blank except for new handwriting, the ink still glistening wet. "You shouldn't have read this, Rebecca." Her breath caught. The room was cold, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. But something in the reflection moved a fraction slower than she did, just enough to notice. And when she whispered, "Who are you?" the reflection smiled. Then, from the corner of the room, came the faint sound of a child humming the same tune that the Whitford twins were said to sing in their garden, a melody that hadn't been heard for over a century. Rebecca closed the journal and slid it beneath her bed. But the smell of smoke had already returned, curling softly through the dark. Sleep no longer came easily after that night. Rebecca began to wake at odd hours, always at 3:07 a.m., as though something precise and deliberate was calling her name from somewhere deep beneath the house. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. Every sound was sharpened, amplified, echoing through her as if the walls themselves were listening. The journal remained locked in a drawer, though she could feel its presence, pulsing faintly in her thoughts like a living thing. She told herself the new writing had been a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion. But each time she passed that drawer, the handle would seem slightly turned, as if recently touched. On the third night, she heard the humming again. It came from below the floorboards this time, muffled, distant, but unmistakably human. The same childish melody, looping endlessly, a lullaby without warmth. Rebecca rose from bed, her breath clouding in the cold air, and pressed her ear to the floor. The tune stopped. Then, in the silence, came the faintest whisper, "Come down." Her skin tightened. There was no basement in the old Bath townhouse, only a crawl space accessible through a trapdoor beneath the rug in the study. She hadn't opened it once since moving in. She lit a candle and went downstairs, the flame trembling as though caught in invisible breath. The house creaked around her, groaning in its old bones. When she pulled the rug back, the trapdoor's latch was already unhooked. For a moment she froze, because she remembered locking it herself months ago. The hinges screamed when she opened it. A wave of cold air rolled out, damp and smelling faintly of ash. The candle's flame struggled, then steadied. She lowered herself into the darkness, her knees brushing against stone, the wood above closing her off from the faint glow of street lamps outside. The crawl space was low and narrow, the floor made of compacted dirt. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere in the dark. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the faint outline of old furniture, broken chairs, a splintered cradle, boxes half buried in dust. And there, against the far wall, stood something that froze her breath. A mirror. It was small, oval, framed in tarnished silver. The glass was cracked, a fine web of fractures like veins spreading from the center. She knelt before it, her candle's light reflecting unevenly across the shattered surface. For a long moment she saw nothing, just her own reflection, blurred and ghost-like. Then the cracks began to move. Not quickly, not violently, just a slow, deliberate widening, as though something behind the glass were pressing gently outward. Her reflection rippled. Her eyes shifted a fraction too late to match her movements. And then, so softly she almost doubted it, the reflection smiled. Rebecca stumbled back, her candle slipping from her hand. The flame extinguished on the dirt floor, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged, wild and blinding. She crawled toward where she thought the ladder was, hands scraping against splinters, heart thundering in her ears, and then, from behind her, came the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, wet, close. She turned, her hand fumbling for the lighter she kept in her pocket. The tiny spark flared for an instant, enough to see a shape standing inches away. Not a full figure, but an outline of a child's face, shimmering faintly through the air like steam. The lighter flickered again, and the shape vanished. When Rebecca burst through the trapdoor, gasping, dawn was already touching the curtains. She locked the hatch, shoved a chair over it, and sat against the wall until daylight filled the room. The humming didn't return. But later that morning, she noticed dirt smeared across the wooden floor, small footprints leading from the trapdoor to the desk where the journal had been kept. And when she opened the drawer, the journal was gone. Her phone buzzed then. A text, no number, no contact name. Just a single message. You shouldn't have left him down there. The room spun. Rebecca's knees weakened. She whispered into the empty air, "Who are you?" The reply came seconds later. "He's been waiting since the photograph." Outside, the bells of the Bath Abbey began to ring. But beneath the sound, faint and persistent, came another, like children laughing through the static of a century-old gramophone. And though Rebecca told herself it was impossible, the laughter didn't seem to come from outside. It was coming from the mirror in the hallway. By the time Rebecca worked up the courage to move toward the hallway, the laughter had stopped. The house was silent again, but that kind of silence that feels conscious, alert. The kind that breathes when you aren't listening closely enough. The mirror on the wall was small and unremarkable, a piece that had come with the house. She stared at it from across the room for a long time, telling herself it was only her reflection that shifted, only the candlelight that trembled. But deep down she already knew better. When she finally stepped closer, she noticed something she had never seen before. The mirror's silvering was uneven, blotched in places like dried tears. And behind her own reflection, faint, almost imperceptible, stood the shape of a child. Just a blur of light and shadow, but unmistakably there. Her pulse hammered in her neck. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her voice cracked under its own breath. The boy didn't move. He was small, maybe 7 or 8, his outline translucent. What she could see of his face was soft and pale, with eyes that seemed too still to belong to something living. She took another step forward. "Are you Alice's brother?" she asked. The boy tilted his head. His mouth opened, but the sound that came wasn't words. It was that same old lullaby, distorted, echoing like it was being sung from underwater. The same song Margaret had written about. Rebecca backed away, but the reflection didn't mimic her. It stayed there, watching. Then its lips moved again, this time forming silent words. She couldn't hear them, but she understood them. "Help me!" Something inside her broke open at that. Fear, pity, disbelief, all tangled into one unbearable knot. She lifted a shaking hand to the mirror. Her fingertip hovered an inch from the glass, and for a moment she thought she could feel warmth radiating from it. Then the glass shifted beneath her touch, pliant like the surface of water. A flash, her vision split, 2 scenes at once. The hallway around her and another place, dim and blurred, as though she was peering through smoke. She saw walls blackened with soot, a child's crib overturned, 2 small shapes holding hands in the corner, faces turned away. A third figure beside them, standing in the shadow of a cracked mirror, the boy. But he wasn't looking at the twins. He was looking at her. Rebecca stumbled back, yanking her hand away. The mirror was solid again. She fell hard against the opposite wall, gasping, clutching her chest as though her heart had been shocked into silence. The doorbell rang. Once, then again, harder. She dragged herself up, her legs barely steady, and opened the front door. It was an elderly man, thin, stooped, with a face weathered like folded paper. He removed his cap and said quietly, "You're the woman who bought the Whitford property, aren't you?" Rebecca nodded, still trembling. "I was a groundskeeper there long after the fire," he continued. My father worked for Henry Whitford. He told me stories when I was a boy, stories about that mirror. Rebecca motioned him inside. The man refused to cross the threshold. His eyes darted past her shoulder, landing briefly on the hallway mirror before he looked away. They said the boy wasn't theirs, he murmured. Said Margaret saw him first in a reflection, weeks before the fire. Then the girls started talking to him too. Henry called him a trick of the light. Margaret? She said he was lonely. Rebecca swallowed hard. Who was he? No one ever found out, the old man said. But after the fire, my father went into the ruins to recover what he could. He found that same mirror, unbroken. Said when he looked into it, there was a boy's face staring back, smiling. And behind him, the girls, holding hands. The man stepped back from the doorway. You should leave that mirror alone, he said. Once you look long enough, he starts to see you too. He turned and walked away, his shadow vanishing into the fading afternoon light. Rebecca stood there, unable to move, until the bells of the abbey rang again. When she finally turned back to close the door, she caught sight of something in the mirror. The boy's face was clearer now, sharp, defined, and smiling softly. In his hand was the same leather-bound journal she'd locked away days ago, and on the page he held open, written in fresh black ink, were 5 words that froze her blood. It's your turn, Rebecca. By the following evening, Rebecca could no longer pretend that what she saw was exhaustion or grief. The mirror had changed. She could feel it breathing when she passed, as though the glass itself inhaled her presence. It no longer showed the house as it was, but as it had been. The wallpaper peeling, the floorboards scorched, the air hazy with invisible smoke. She kept the curtains closed, the lights low. Every sound felt magnified. The ticking of the wall clock scraped against her nerves. Somewhere upstairs, wood creaked, too deliberate to be the house settling. When she tried to sleep, the lullaby came again, but softer this time, like it was being hummed against her ear from the other side of a dream. At dawn, she decided to do what she'd been avoiding. She drove back to Whitford Hall. The property was in ruins, nothing but the skeletal remains of walls and stone chimneys rising out of overgrown ivy. But the moment she stepped out of her car, the silence hit her, deep, pressurized like being underwater. The birds didn't sing here. Even the wind seemed to pass around the place rather than through it. Rebecca walked toward what had once been the nursery, guided by the memory of photographs she'd studied. The ground was soft beneath her boots. Charred wood still poked through the grass like bones. And there, near what remained of the foundation, she found something half buried in dirt. A fragment of scorched glass, oval, edged in silver. Her stomach turned. The mirror. She brushed away the soil, but before she could pick it up, she froze. Reflected in that broken piece of glass was the image of a little girl standing behind her. Not one of the twins, older, unfamiliar, pale dress, dark eyes. When Rebecca turned, there was no one. Only the whisper of air shifting through the burnt beams. She backed away, heart pounding. That's when her phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. You're standing where the photograph was taken. The world tilted. She turned slowly, scanning the ruins. A faint breeze lifted the grass, and in the middle of the clearing she saw it. A shape outlined by the sun. It was the faint imprint of an old iron tripod, rusted to nothing, still embedded in the ground. Rebecca knelt beside it, trembling. That was where the camera had been. She remembered the photograph vividly. The twins in white, their mother behind them, her face half in shadow. But in the original, the camera had captured something else, faint and almost dismissed by historians as a flaw in exposure, the outline of a boy, standing between them. Except now, as Rebecca stared at the spot, she saw something the photograph had never shown. A black scorch mark in the exact shape of a handprint, small, pressed into the dirt, fingers spread wide. The earth beneath it smelled faintly of soot and iron, and then she heard the shudder. That sharp, mechanical click, unmistakable, impossible. It echoed across the clearing like a single heartbeat. Rebecca spun around, breath catching in her throat. There was no camera. No one else. But she saw, for just an instant, a flicker of movement in the air, as though a photograph had been taken and the light itself remembered it. Her phone buzzed again. You're in the picture now. The screen dimmed, glitched, then turned black. Rebecca's reflection appeared faintly in the glass, and behind her, the boy's face surfaced again, clearer than ever. His eyes were wide, almost human, and in them she could see herself, frozen mid-breath, staring into an impossible past. She dropped the phone. The sound echoed far too long. The ground beneath her seemed to sigh, a deep exhale from something buried. When she ran back to her car, she didn't look behind her. Not even when she heard the faint crunch of footsteps following in perfect rhythm with her own. Later that night, back in her flat, she tried to delete the messages, but the thread wouldn't disappear. Each time she pressed erase, a new message appeared. The same words repeated in a looping pattern. Say his name. Say his name. Say his name. Rebecca whispered into the dark. I don't know it, for the first time. Her phone replied with a photograph. It was the original birthday portrait of the Whitford twins. Except now, behind the girls, where the smoke once blurred the background, stood Rebecca herself, and the boy was standing beside her. Smiling, Rebecca barely remembered falling asleep. The exhaustion had become something closer to paralysis, a numbness that crept through her bones and made every movement feel like swimming through tar. When she opened her eyes, daylight was spilling weakly through the curtains, and her phone lay on the floor beside her, still glowing faintly. The photograph was gone. Her reflection in the black screen looked pale, unfamiliar. She rose slowly, the room pressing close around her. Her body felt heavy, as though gravity itself had thickened overnight. Every sound in the house carried an echo. The floorboards creaked under her feet, repeating each step a half-second too late. She thought for a moment it was her mind fracturing under fear. But then she heard something else, the faint scrape of wood from the study below, the chair she had left over the trap door. Her stomach turned cold. She moved through the hallway as quietly as she could, but the old house betrayed her, groaning under every footstep. When she reached the study, her breath caught. The rug had been pulled aside, the trapdoor yawning open like a wound, and resting against the far wall, standing upright as though someone had placed it there deliberately, was the mirror. Whole again? Not cracked. Not burned. Perfect, Rebecca's heart thudded painfully. The silver frame gleamed faintly, its surface pulsing with light that wasn't coming from anywhere in the room. She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. The glass looked clean, too clean, as though it had been polished from within. For the first time, she could see her reflection clearly, but it didn't move. It stood perfectly still, eyes wide, mouth closed. Then behind the reflection, another face appeared. The boy's. He was closer now, his features sharp, a thin mouth, dark circles beneath hollow eyes. But there was something new, a glimmer of familiarity. Rebecca's throat tightened. The shape of his jaw, the faint curl of his hair. They were the same as in an old photograph she had once seen of Margaret Whitford's husband, Henry, as a child. No, she whispered. You're not theirs. The reflection smiled. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her. She didn't look away from the glass. She just reached for it, her hand trembling. The message was only one word: listen. Then the sound began. It came not from her phone, but from the mirror itself. A faint crackle, like the start of an old gramophone. Then a woman's voice, warbling and distant, began to sing. It was Margaret Whitford. Rebecca knew that voice now. She had read it between every line of the journal. The melody was the same as the twins' lullaby, but slower, sadder, heavy with something that sounded like regret. As the song played, the mirror's surface shifted. The reflection deepened, drawing light inward until the glass became almost liquid. Rebecca could see figures moving inside, the twins standing hand in hand, their white dresses scorched at the edges. Behind them, Margaret, her eyes hollow but tender. one arm reaching toward the boy who stood apart, watching. The boy turned, looked directly at her. The song faltered, warped, and then broke into a static hiss. And from within that distortion came a man's voice, calm, deliberate, echoing through the room. "You brought him back." Rebecca stumbled backward. Who are you? You saw the photograph. You read her words. That's how it starts. You opened the door. The voice grew deeper, layered, as if it wasn't one speaker but many, overlapping, whispering through each other. He doesn't live in mirrors. He is the reflection. The mirror flickered, the figures vanishing, replaced by scenes that moved too quickly to comprehend. Fire, hands pounding on glass, a face screaming without sound. Rebecca fell to her knees, covering her ears, but the noise wasn't entering through sound. It was inside her head, spreading like ice. When it stopped, she looked up. The mirror was calm again, and in its surface she saw herself. But the room behind her in the reflection was not the study. It was the nursery of Whitford Hall, restored to perfection. Her reflection smiled gently, and then she heard her own voice, whispering from the other side. "You're home." Rebecca backed away, choking on a sob. The phone buzzed once more. A video file had appeared, 1912 birthday move. Her hands shook as she opened it. The film flickered to life, grainy, black and white, showing the Whitford twins laughing as they blew out their candles. The camera panned, catching Margaret, serene and sad, holding a mirror in her lap. Then, just as the film seemed to end, the lens shifted, turning toward the doorway. Rebecca was standing there, alive, modern, wearing her same clothes. The screen went black, and from somewhere deep within the house, the mirror began to hum again, that same tune looping endlessly, until it was impossible to tell whether it was coming from the glass or from inside her own head. Rebecca didn't remember standing up. One moment she was staring at the black screen of her phone, and the next she was moving, slow, unsteady, like someone sleepwalking through water. The humming from the mirror pulsed through the walls, soft but relentless, drawing her toward the staircase. Every step seemed to take her deeper into another kind of air, thicker, colder. She passed the same hallway she had walked 100 times before, but the colors were wrong now. The wallpaper looked older. The light from the windows dimmed as though it were filtering through smoke. Her own reflection, caught in the glass frames along the wall, lagged a moment behind. At the top of the stairs, the house no longer looked like hers. The furniture was different. The air smelled faintly of dust and perfume. A faint laughter echoed from somewhere down the hall. She followed it. The sound led her to a door she had never seen before, narrow, painted a faded blue. Her hand hesitated on the handle. She whispered almost to herself, "This isn't real." The handle turned easily. Inside was a nursery. It was whole, perfect. The wallpaper patterned with faded swans, the same as in the old Whitford photographs. Toys lined the shelves. A wooden rocking horse stood near the window, its paint cracked but bright. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from a road. Rebecca's throat tightened. Her knees nearly gave out. 2 small beds stood side by side, sheets perfectly smooth, pillows indented as if 2 small heads had just been resting there. And on the dresser facing the door sat a silver-framed photograph. The photograph. The twins in white, Margaret behind them, all smiling faintly toward the camera. But now, as Rebecca stepped closer, she saw that there was someone else in the image. A 4th figure. A shadow at the edge of the frame, taller than the children, its face blurred but unmistakably hers. The air in the room grew cold enough to sting. She reached out to touch the photo, but her fingertips brushed glass, not frame, not surface. The world around her rippled. The nursery trembled softly, and then, like the skin of a drum breaking, the wall opposite her split down the middle. A mirror, tall and flawless, unfolded from within the crack. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her body disobeyed. The reflection was not her own anymore. It was Margaret. her eyes wide with exhaustion and terror, her dress streaked with soot. She lifted one hand to the glass, palm trembling. Rebecca mirrored the gesture without thinking. Their fingertips aligned. Then Margaret spoke, though her lips barely moved. Her voice came not through the air but through the bones of the house. "He's not a ghost, Rebecca. He's a memory that won't die." Rebecca's chest constricted. "Who is he?" "He was ours. And he wasn't." The reflection began to flicker, Margaret's face splitting into two. Her own and another, younger, masculine, familiar. "The boy, Henry made a deal," the voice said. "When our son died, he found a way to bring him back. A reflection for a life. But the mirror doesn't give, it takes. It took our girls, it took me, and now it's taken you." Rebecca's tears blurred the glass. "How do I stop it?" The reflection's mouth moved, but the sound distorted, breaking apart like static. She could only make out a few words. "Break it. Before it learns your name." Then the light flickered. The reflection wasn't Margaret anymore. It was Rebecca herself, but older, gaunt, her eyes blackened, her mouth open in a silent scream. Behind her, in the mirrored world, the boy was standing closer than before, one small hand resting on her shoulder. Rebecca stumbled back, clutching the dresser. The air around her was burning cold now, her breath visible. The mirror began to hum again, louder, deeper, the pitch vibrating through her skull. The glass flexed outward, the surface rippling like liquid, and from within, a hand pressed against the inside of the glass. Small, pale, familiar. Rebecca grabbed the nearest object, a brass candlestick, and hurled it at the mirror. The sound shattered the world. Glass burst outward in 1,000 shards, slicing through the air, embedding in the walls, raining light and reflection across the nursery. The humming stopped. Silence returned, but as the last shard fell, Rebecca heard something, not in the room, but inside her own chest. A heartbeat that wasn't hers. She looked down. A single piece of the mirror had lodged in her arm, no larger than a coin. Beneath its fractured surface, she saw the boy's eyes staring up at her. And then he blinked. The reflection in the shard whispered one word. "Stay," Rebecca screamed, tearing the shard free and throwing it across the room. But when it struck the wall, it didn't clatter. It vanished, and from the floor beneath her, she heard it again. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate, tap, 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 as if someone small and patient were knocking from underneath. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and dread. Rebecca couldn't stay in her apartment for more than an hour without feeling the pull of the mirror, or rather, the pull of him. She avoided reflections, taped over windows, even covered her phone screen when it buzzed with the unknown number. But the pull was relentless, subtle, like water creeping into cracks beneath stone. It began with small things. A whisper of movement in the periphery of her vision. A child's laugh echoing down the hallway when no one was there. Mirrors, glass surfaces, even polished spoons seemed to shimmer, reflecting not her own face, but the nursery at Whitford Hall. She woke in the night to find shadows moving along the walls, shapes too small to belong to anyone she could see. One evening, she returned to the university library, poring over old records, newspaper archives, property deeds, even private letters from Whitford relatives. Each fragment told the same story in overlapping ways: the twins' odd behavior, Margaret's journals, the fire, and the boy. And always the mirrors. A letter, yellowed and crumpled, caught her eye. Written by Henry Whitford, it was never mailed, never filed. The handwriting was sharp, tight with urgency. "The boy is not ours, but he has chosen us. The mirror holds him. It is his tether. Destroy it and the girls will die. Do nothing and he grows. I have failed my daughters and the cost is mine alone. Beware anyone who touches the photograph." They invite him in. Rebecca felt her stomach twist. The boy was growing. The mirror, the shards, the photograph, they weren't static. They fed on attention, on curiosity, and she had invited him in. That night, the apartment became unlivable. The mirrors reflected impossible angles. Her own reflection lingered for a moment after she turned away. The humming returned, faint at first, then swelling to a chorus, layered with whispers, the lullaby sung by dozens of voices she had never heard. She could no longer tell which noises were real, which were in her mind, which belonged to him. Then the first dream came. She was standing in Whitford Hall again. The floorboards groaned under her weight. The nursery stretched before her, impossibly vast. The twins were there, older now, faces pale and eyes wide, watching her silently. The boy stood between them, smiling, one hand extended toward her. "Say my name," he whispered. She woke screaming, the sound echoing off the walls of her apartment. The shard of mirror from the nursery lay on her desk, gleaming faintly, edges still sharp. She hadn't touched it. She hadn't even looked at it since throwing it across the room, and yet, somehow, it had returned. Her phone buzzed. Another message. No words, just an image. The birthday photograph. Zoomed in this time. The boy's eyes were alive, staring directly at her. She tried to delete it, but the app refused. She swiped, tapped, rebooted, yet the image persisted, pixel by pixel embedding itself into the memory of her device. And then, beneath the photograph, faint letters began to appear, bleeding slowly across the digital paper. "Come home. The mirror waits." Rebecca realized then that the boy had found a way to follow her. He was no longer bound to the past. He had learned, adapted, waited through the decades. The apartment felt colder, the shadows deeper, the humming louder, and somewhere, beneath the floorboards, tap, 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 a patient, deliberate rhythm that seemed to mock her heartbeat. Rebecca understood. He was not just a memory anymore. He was a presence. Watching, waiting, learning, and he had claimed her. By now, Rebecca had stopped trying to rationalize. The Whitford boy wasn't a trick of light, a ghost, or a hallucination. He was something else, something ancient, patient, and profoundly aware. She could feel it in her bones every time she passed a reflective surface. The world outside her apartment felt wrong, distorted, as if the glass in every window, every mirror, every polished metal surface was a portal, a door he could peer through. It started subtly at first. The photograph of the twins appeared in her apartment unbidden, resting on countertops, on the edge of her sink, on her nightstand. She would glance at it and feel her heart skip, the air thickening, the image shifting just slightly, the boy leaning closer, the twins' eyes widening. Margaret's hand lifting as if to warn, then came the whispers. She heard them not in her ears but in her thoughts. Quiet, persistent, "Say my name." She tried to resist, tried to ignore the digital messages, the reflections, the shifting photographs. But the boy had patience beyond human comprehension. Every time she blinked, every time she turned her gaze, she felt him growing nearer, testing boundaries, pushing. One night, as rain hammered the windows, she sat before the photograph. A candle flickered nearby, casting shadows across the wall. The twins' faces looked serene, innocent. But the boy's eyes, always the boy's eyes, were alive. They glimmered. They followed her. And then, impossibly, the photograph changed again. Margaret's face twitched. Clara and Alice's lips parted in faint gasps. The boy's mouth moved. Words formed slowly across the grainy surface. "You're next," Rebecca gasped. Her pulse rattled her ribs. The candle flame shivered violently. And then the whispers began, layering over one another, faster now. "Say my name. Say my name. Say my name," panic surged. She picked up the photograph, shaking, her breath visible in the candlelight. The boy in the image raised his hand and pointed at her. A chilling realization struck her. The photograph wasn't just a reflection of the past. It was a map, a tether, a summons. Every time she had looked, every time she had investigated, she had drawn him closer. She sank to her knees, clutching the photograph. The candle flickered, then went out. In the darkness, she felt the room shift. The walls lengthened, the ceiling fell. Shadows pooled at her feet, rising slowly, twisting. And in the center, the boy appeared. Stepping from the glass of the photograph itself, small, deliberate. his pale eyes fixed on her. "Say my name," he whispered. Her throat burned. Her mind scrambled. Every instinct screamed to flee, but she was trapped in a gravity she could not fight. The twins appeared then, ghost-like, their white dresses floating around their small frames. Margaret's face hovered behind them, torn between sorrow and warning. "He feeds on the living who know him," Margaret said softly, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "You must not give him your name. Never give him your name." The boy's lips curved into a cruel, knowing smile. "You already brought me here," he said. "Now you will finish what you started." Rebecca's hands shook as the candle sparked back to life. The photograph in her lap no longer showed still images. The twins were moving, breathing, and behind them, the boy advanced, reaching for her. She realized in stark terror that every reflection she had avoided, every mirrored surface, every window she had shuttered, had been a conduit. He could see her always. He could reach for her always. Her mind screamed for escape. Yet she was rooted, frozen by the weight of inevitability. The boy was no longer a figure in a photograph. He was the photograph itself, the frame itself, the reflection itself, and he wanted her. The room around Rebecca began to warp. Walls stretched impossibly high, the floor tilting beneath her feet. Shadows coalesced into shapes that flickered just beyond recognition, as if the house itself had become a vessel for something older than time. The twins appeared at the edges of her vision, their white dresses fluttering like smoke, faces pale, expressionless, yet somehow aware of her every move. Margaret's eyes bore into her from the shadows, sorrowful, warning yet helpless. The boy stood before her, impossibly small yet overwhelming in presence. His dark eyes glimmered with knowledge that shouldn't belong to any child, and his smile twisted into something both familiar and wrong. Every reflection in the room, from shattered glass to polished silver, now showed him, multiplied endlessly, converging, closing in. He was everywhere and nowhere, waiting for a single misstep, a single utterance of her name. Rebecca's pulse thundered. She pressed herself to the floor, clutching the original photograph as though it could protect her. The twins in the photo moved, their eyes meeting hers, pleading. The boy's reflection reached out through the glass, merging with the candlelight, with her own reflection in every shard, every mirror, every surface. The air hummed, vibrating with a sound that was not a sound, a resonance that went straight to her bones. "Say my name," the boy whispered. Rebecca shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I won't give it to you." He laughed, a sound like glass cracking. The mirrors rippled, and suddenly the room became a tunnel of reflections stretching into infinity. She saw herself in every pane, screaming, pleading, reaching. Behind her, the boy advanced through each mirror, hand extended. The twins followed silently, their presence like a warning, Margaret's sorrow deepening with each step. Her hands trembled on the photograph. The candlelight flickered violently, throwing shadows into impossible angles. Rebecca realized what she must do. The boy could only reach her if she gave him her identity, her acknowledgement. She had to erase herself from the mirrors. With a scream that tore from the depths of her soul, she slammed the photograph onto the floor. Light exploded from the glass, blinding, searing, and the mirrors cracked in unison, splintering into 1,000 shards. Each shard reflected fragments of herself. The twins, Margaret, and the boy, all colliding, fracturing, and stretching into nothingness. Then, silence. When Rebecca opened her eyes, she was alone in her apartment. The candle was extinguished, the mirrors dull, ordinary, reflecting only her own exhausted face. The photograph lay on the floor, blank. The twins' faces were gone. The boy was gone. Margaret's warning had dissolved into the nothingness of shattered glass. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The apartment was still, silent. The shadows no longer moved. The floorboards creaked only as they should, in response to her footsteps. Yet she knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that nothing had truly ended. He still existed somewhere, in a reflection, in a photograph, in a fragment of time, waiting, patient. Rebecca picked up the blank photograph and placed it in a drawer, locking it. The shards of the mirror were wrapped and stored, hidden, discarded. But she knew their power could never truly be destroyed. She walked to the window, letting the sunlight touch her face. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. But inside, a memory lingered. A lullaby humming softly, faint as a wind through a hollow house. In the mirror of her hallway, she glimpsed her reflection. It was hers, for now. But somewhere deep behind her eyes, she felt it. The weight of something unseen, waiting, patient. She shivered, knowing that one day, if she let curiosity or fear slip, the photograph, the mirror, and the boy would call again. And when that day came, she would have to face him, forever reflected.